So a student asked me if 1984, if he recommend, or if I recommended 1984 by George Orwell, and so I decided to make a video and respond, just make it for all of you because there's some key things that you should know. First off, I always recommend that book to all people eventually in their life. I think everybody should read 1984. And also read Animal Farm by Orwell. I would actually recommend you read Animal Farm first. It's an easier book, and it's actually all the same stuff that you'd find in 1984, just packaged in a smaller book and kind of easier to understand. 1984 is, whereas Animal Farm is more, it's scary and frustrating, but it's a little more fun. It's kind of funny to read. 1984 is definitely not funny. It is a very powerful, intense book that I read at the age of 17 one summer when I just was knocking out books one summer between my junior and senior year, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. I think I knocked it out in about 2 days. Just intense book and a very scary book at the same time. The first thing I would recommend, though, is that you have your parents check it out first, because there is some stuff there in the book that is just what we'd call adult. It is not, there's some what you call sensuality. So have your parents approve it first. It was an 8th grader who recommended the book, or asked me if I recommend it. And I would say not yet as an 8th grader. Like I said, I would think as an 8th grader, you're better off just reading Animal Farm. That's perfectly fine. And you'll get a lot out of it. And Animal Farm's a great book to read later, a couple times throughout your life, and just kind of remind yourself all the great lessons in it. But I would recommend 1984 for any kid. I do consider it an essential book, especially if you're like me, constantly, thinking about oppression and liberty and constantly being fearful of an oppressive government, which we must always be watchful for. So, situationally, it's not it's a more, like I said, an adult book. There are some tense scenes. There's a very famous scene with rats that I won't spoil, but it's probably the most memorable scene for everybody that has towards the end, that it just involves, rats. And if you don't like rats, you're definitely not going to like that scene. There's some great symbolism, some very funny, powerful symbolism in it. One of my favorite, most obvious symbols of this scene is where this man gets arrested, and it turns out in the middle of the night, let me go back. Okay, so the premise of 1984, if you don't know, is a future world in England that has become completely, where they tried to achieve a socialist utopia, but what ended up happening was an oppressive government takes over, which was what always happens whenever you try to have a communist, socialist government. When you give all the power to the government takes over and then doesn't give up the power, and then it's usually one man in charge. Interestingly, you never really hear about who's in charge. It's never actually clear if there is an actual leader. All we know is that there's just the mechanisms are in place for this oppressive government that watches your every move. And the children are encouraged to spy on their parents to make sure that their parents aren't saying anything against the government. And which actually comes out of what really did happen in Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia. So one of the books my 5th graders read this year is Breaking Stalin's Nose, which is a book I do recommend. In fact, I'll make another book about video about that one. So, but where they have, or in China, where they had the Red Scarf League, where children would be moved into this, were encouraged to join this party, this political party for kids, where they were encouraged to spy on their parents. So one of the scenes that happens is one of the character in the book he ends up getting arrested because his son was spying on him and overheard him in his sleep talking out loud, saying things against the government. And, which is surprising because up until that time, we think this character, all he can say, he can never say anything. He's always constantly praising Big Brother, the name of the government. And so as he's in prison, he's even saying, I'm so proud of my son, and I'm so glad that he caught me, and because I didn't even know I had these evil thoughts about the government, and I'm glad that he caught me, and hopefully I can be cured of these evil thoughts, and bravo to my son. And then it says, and then immediately he suddenly had this look of like pain or something, and he goes over and sits on the bucket and then unleashes, evacuates his bowels and unleashes this foul smell, basically implying that it's not even implying, he's just flat out saying that this guy is full of poo, that what he's saying is not actually true, right? So, there's some, funny scenes like that. That's probably the funniest scene, but it's not a funny situation. And so a lot of great things you'll learn, a lot of great tropes and that are in our culture now, like Big Brother is watching you, war is peace, and you'll see it. I'll put it in as the thumbnail for this video. The three sayings that Big Brother says, and they're all three of them are meant to be paradoxical, and so I do recommend it. In conclusion, for older high school kids, though, I wouldn't recommend it for an 8th grader unless your parents think it's okay. I do know of 8th graders who've read it. It just depends on what you are ready to read. So in conclusion, have your parents check it out first. I wouldn't let my kids read it yet. I'm gonna wait until they're in high school at least, maybe junior year like I read it. So. But if you get out of high school and you get into college and you still haven't read it, go find a copy on your own and read it, because you do need to read 1984. All right, there it is. And moral things, I think that's it. Basically just some sensuality. Other than that, though, it's got a great moral perspective. Once again, we must remember, I guess I haven't said it in these videos, but communism is really the only political system that the Catholic Church has actually called out as evil, that is condemned. It is truly condemned. There are many encyclicals that the popes have made declaring communism as evil. So interestingly, by the way, if you don't know this, George Orwell, who wrote the book, great writer, fascinating man, was actually a socialist, was a diehard socialist, and wrote two of the most famous anti-socialist books ever written, 1984 and Animal Farm. And he wrote those basically saying, I believe in this stuff, but I fear this is what will happen. So let's not let this happen. And I'm curious to know, a lot of us, everybody who reads George Orwell, wishes we could revive him now and say, what do you think now? Considering everything he wrote is exactly what has happened every time we've had a communist government. You look at Cuba, you've got the same thing. That's everything happening in 1984 happened in Cuba. Everything that happened in 1984 happened in communist Russia. Everything happening in 1984 is currently happening in China, and even with surveillance, constant surveillance of other people, in your own homes, right? In North Korea, you have North Korea is the epitome of 1984, where everybody's starving, but nobody knows that they are, because they have no way because they're so blocked off from everything that they actually can't compare it to their own lives. So, or to other people's lives. So yes, 1984. Read it when you're older. All right, enjoy.